welcome to Data Co-Creation, the future of post-trade, a discussion brought to you jointly by The Asset and Standard Chartered. My name is Lisa Othner-Gauss. I'm the Global Head of Marketing for Financial Markets at Standard Chartered. I'm based in Singapore and I will be your moderator today. The world of post-trade, generally known as the activities that take place at the middle and back office to support trade execution, is a very complicated one. And that has a lot to do with a huge amount of data that is being exchanged between multiple parties. When I joined the industry back in the 1990s, I was working for Omgeo, a fintech company jointly owned by the DTCC and Thomson Reuters, and we were discussing these very issues back then. So fast forward a couple of decades, we're still here debating it. So let's find out why the issues are so complicated. So I'm very delighted to welcome to this very exciting discussion Ashley Payne, Director, Data Management, Analytics and Innovation at Royal Bank of Canada, as well as Ryan Cuthbertson, Global Head of Financing and Securities Products at Standard Chartered. Welcome to both of you joining me live from London. Ashley, I would like to start with you because data has really been a very, very core part of all the different roles that you have held, both in asset management and on the custodian side. So shed light for us on why this is such a complicated issue we're dealing with.
Yeah, sure. Well, these issues just exist within the area of post-trade processing. I mean, practically speaking, we have lots of parties with different, and at the time, age, systems and architecture, all trying to connect together. And that's not easy. We also have an industry that still lacks standards, which, if you work in the data world, that's quite annoying. And from a day-to-day perspective, we're still subject to technologies that don't always easily tag, log, organize, and make data easily accessible. Along with that, you also have a variety of parties, all of whom have different levels of digital maturity. So, for example, we would prefer APIs as our method of data transmission. That would be our data transmission channel. But you need to recognize that different clients will be at different stages of their sort of digital maturity, and they have different needs. So you have to make sure that you've got the transmission channels that match the varying needs of quite a wide client base. The combination of these factors can build latency and delays into the process, and we get this kind of intermediation lag, which creates inefficiencies.
That's a good point, Ryan. I know when you and I have been discussing this very issue numerous times, intermediation lag keeps coming up a lot in your conversation. You've held many different roles in operations and fund services across some of the largest banks, really, and still you're talking about intermediation lag. Explain to us what that really is and why it is causing so many challenges.
Intermediation lag simply is linking to what Ashley said, the number of jumps and the different participants in a value chain that sit between an investor and an issuer of a security, and it's particularly prevalent when we're transversing hemispheres from east to west. So the number of parties that will touch a thing being a piece of data, can be up to 7. And everybody, as Ashley was alluding to, tends to call the thing something slightly different. So if I take a simple example of a mobile phone, somebody will call it a mobile phone, somebody else will then call it an Apple mobile phone, somebody else will call it an Apple iPhone 10, and somebody else will call it an Apple iPhone 10 with my daughter's stickers on the back. So the challenge around the data and the intermediation lag is the amount of replication and processing of those things that need to get from one part of the world to another to make a trade or a corporate event or an investment successful.
Exactly, and I would imagine sometimes they fail because of challenges encountered along the way. Is that right?
So each time that somebody processes that thing, there is a chance of an error, whether that be a human error or a systemic-based error. And of course, that adds risk to the process and can lead to a failed trade. It most certainly always leads to people, the investor, not getting information in as a timely manner as what they should to be able to make subsequent investment decisions.
Right. So we've been talking about legacy systems, sometimes lack of standards, many parties involved, many different steps involved. So let's pivot to discussing what a potential solution could look like, right? And clearly this is a discussion about data co-creation. So we're going to argue the point that data co-creation could indeed be the way forward. And Ryan, I want to pose this to you because as I understand it, data co-creation is a little bit your brainchild. It's something that you came up with as a concept at Standard Chartered. So explain to us what it entails and how will it solve the issues at hand?
Yeah, thank you. So if we take a little step back and think about exactly what we do as a security services house, and whilst I acknowledge that there is an economic outcome required from the pieces of information or the trades that flow through our platforms, really what we're doing is dealing with data. So we ingest something from our clients, we take a look at it, we see, is it okay? We transform that piece of data and then we send it on generally down to the financial market infrastructure, whether that be a CCP or a clearinghouse or an exchange, depending on the market. So if you then say, actually, I'm not in the business of being a custodian, I'm in the business of data transformation, then you can start to think about things slightly differently, and you can start to really consider how that you enhance your services to your clients and your clients' clients, particularly when your client is an intermediary as well. And you can really start to enhance and change the way that information flows between platforms, between participants, to enhance the client experience, to reduce risk and to reduce costs. So now when we're approaching your product development, and particularly when we're talking to our significantly large clients and talking about data co-creation, it's really about how do we make sure that you and your clients get the right information at the right time to enhance that client experience and reduce risk and reduce costs. So one practical example of that would be we in South Africa with one of our clients, we enhanced the data conversation between us by adding only 6 additional data points, right? So we're not talking about anything that's significantly complicated, and we're not talking about totally recreating a data set. We added 6 additional data fields, and the outcome of that was that we reduced client service queries, which really is confusion around a trade, because obviously you don't ask a question if you're really cool about where the trade is and that it's going to settle. We reduced that by 80%. Right, so taking a reasonably small bite-sized chunk and enhancing that data, we then gave clients and our clients' clients the data that they needed at the right time, so they no longer had to be concerned around what was going to happen with that trade, which also means that they can then really focus on trades that are at risk and are potential to fail and cause a poor economic outcome.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So you've explained to us what data co-creation is all about. But actually, when you and I spoke not too long ago, you mentioned that there are actually some practical issues remaining that would need to be addressed. So can you tell us more about that, please?
If we were designing these models, these processes again now, they wouldn't look like as they do. Right, so we're very happy to collaborate with Ryan to try and address some of these inefficiencies. But from a practical considerations perspective, there's an ownership question, right? So companies are trying to monetize their data, right, to seek more value from their data assets. So when data is co-created, we then need to establish that ownership model. Is it licensed? Is it public domain? Is it something else? And then along with ownership, you have the practical considerations of roles and responsibilities. So if data is co-owned and there are errors in that data, who fixes it? And then you can also throw into the mix some of the idiosyncrasies you get within financial markets with regulation and particular cross-jurisdiction regulation. So if we have Luxembourg thrown into the mix here and the challenges they have around cloud storage, does that complicate matters as well? So the idea is great, but it's always devil's in the detail and going through that to work out how we would make it work.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. So at least we're on the right path with still clearly issues to be figured out. I would like us now to delve a little bit into what this really means for different parties to a trade. We mentioned there are a number of them, and I was actually going to stick with you for a second, Ashley, because your background is also very heavily in asset management. You've worked for asset managers before, so I'm going to ask you to put your asset management hat on for a moment and really walk us through what the benefits of data co-creation would be for you as an asset manager.
Yeah, sure. And again, this isn't unique to this particular topic. But I mean, from a provider perspective, and ultimately an asset manager will reward us because we can save them time, save them money, reduce risk, or help them generate more profit. The third one is a thorny issue. That's harder to do. But the first two, I can definitely see use cases or early examples where we could get into save time, save money, reduce risk. And I think that's a good area to explore.
And Ryan, is that the same for custodians, or are there other things that a custodian or sub-custodians need to consider?
So I think from a custodian perspective, and particularly if I put my sub-custodian hat on, we are generally the second to last person in the value chain, and the last person in that value chain being the financial market infrastructure. And so we have a key role in doing the last piece of the translation between us and the market infrastructure, and the market infrastructure side is generally defined, and there is not a lot of latitude to change or enhance that process, because it's not just Standard Chartered Bank in a particular market that's using that. There's a whole ecosystem of brokers and other custodians and sub-custodians that need to use it. So if we think about the very, very last mile being absolute, and there being not being able to generate any real benefit in our communications with them, then we really start to think about things upstream, right? And upstream is generally another intermediary, right? It will be a global custodian or a broker dealer. But when we're thinking about how do we enhance that data conversation, how do we enhance that client experience, we're often talking with Ashley and his team about what they're doing with the information and how they're replaying that to their clients. So we're really trying to understand not just what is the value of the next person in the chain, but also trying to develop a pretty deep understanding around how, in this example, RBC is going to use the information and replay that to their clients. And I think once we really understand the value and how Ashley's trying to replay that information, then we can sit together and really start to design how we think we can add benefit, and how additional data above and beyond what's prescribed by market infrastructures can really start to drive the client experience. And just to link back to the example that I used before, whilst there is things that you can measure in terms of the number of queries that have been reduced and the number of risk events that potentially you're allowing more focus, what's really difficult to measure is how much more a client enjoys the experience because they don't have to ask a question, or because they don't get scared that a trade is going to fail and there's going to be financial penalties for it doing so. So developing that deep understanding of not just what we have and potentially what the first client in the chain needs, but how that is being replayed is also something that we're really focused on, and we have exhibited being able to add value. As an example, in many of, and I guess just as a reminder, Standard Chartered as a custodian generally operates in very difficult markets that are either emerging or frontier in nature. And so what you're used to dealing with in terms of receiving information around a corporate event in more mature markets where it can be automated, in some of our markets, we're still reading newspapers, right? To understand what a corporate event is going to be, or we're looking on exchange websites. And so there's a significant amount of information that's available that is not always able to be transferred via an automated method through normal channels such as Swift. So really understanding what we've got, what value that potentially has, and working with our clients to understand how that might be of value is something that's important, and we really focus on. I guess to answer your question more directly, beyond reducing risk and creating a more timely event for a client or their client, it's really what else do we have that we think is going to add value to an end investor and make their life and make their experience easier, which leads to, or at least the theory is that it leads to a more sticky relationship because we're adding value where others are not.
Great. And I want to come back for 1 second to the kind of practical challenges that Ashley mentioned. I mean, we talked about the data ownership questions, ultimately monetization of data. You mentioned, frontier markets with sometimes, difficult, different regulations that we have to take into account. So in the example you brought about the South African client, has that ever come up? How have you tackled it?
So most certainly, we all live in our own corporate hierarchies, and each of those hierarchies has their own standards around letting information in and out of those towers, for want of a better description. There is absolutely an element of corporate inertia that can exist when two houses, two banks are trying to do this type of co-creation. An element of pragmatism is absolutely essential. Also, a willingness to start with something small. Yeah, so just to prove that you can work together is also something that we've found very successful. So there's no need to boil the ocean in the first round. Of course, you can get to boiling the ocean, but first let's have a cup of coffee. But once, at least our experience is that momentum breeds momentum, right? So once that wheel starts to turn, once that you've proved success, the ability to ask for more investment, because these things aren't free, right? They take investment both from people's time, both in technical changes, on both sides of the receiver and the deliverer of information is important. So proving that you can do something, proving that it adds value, makes it easier to do the next thing, and then the next thing can be a little bit bigger, and the next one a little bit bigger, till you get to the point where for some of our very large clients, we're streaming on a live basis a whole bunch of additional data points across 25 of our 40 footprint markets. So that example where we're now boiling the ocean, for want of a better description, that started with a cup of coffee works, and that cup of coffee needs to be sweet, it needs to be hot, it needs to be on point, so that you can get the whole company behind you. So when you start to have tough conversations around, why should I let this person into my firewall? Actually, corporate policy says that you need to do this, and go and challenge that corporate policy. It really aids in those conversations that you can prove success. And so again, being pragmatic. Obviously, there's give and take. The example about my iPhone that I used before is real. Right? Sometimes our clients want something in a certain way. We don't quite agree with that. Give and take, and being pragmatic and understanding that the outcome needs to be success are some of the elements that are needed to make the data co-creation journey successful.
Sounds like perseverance and a will to just keep going is also a key attribute to anyone working on these issues. As we are coming towards the end of our conversation today, I would like to pose one last question to both of you, and that is, if you had to sum up in 3 simple words what the future of data co-creation would look like, what would you say? Ashley, you get the first word.
Ownership, architecture, monetization.
Ryan, what about you?
Understanding, application, and commercialization.
Thank you both very much. This leaves me to thank our audience for tuning in. Thank you very much to The Asset for jointly producing this discussion with us. And of course, a massive thank you to our fabulous speakers, Ashley Payne, Director, Data Management, Analytics and Innovation at Royal Bank of Canada, and Ryan Cuthbertson, Global Head of Financing and Security Services Products at Standard Chartered. My name is Lisa Ordner-Gauss. Thank you very much and goodbye.